You've probably heard of the ancient Stoic philosophers such as Marcus Aurelius, Zeno, or Epictetus. But did you know that thousands of miles away from the Italian peninsula, in Asia, there was a civilization that turned this philosophy into a way of life over thousands of years? I'm talking about the Eurasian nomads, such as the Mongols, ancient Turks, or Huns. Living in the vast Eurasian steppe implied constantly facing windy, snowy winters, often with no forests or mountains to hide behind. Invasions, wars with other nations, livestock deaths, and famines happened very frequently. It's no wonder that this kind of heavy, but in some sense unique environment has created one of the most resilient cultures in the ancient history. In this video, I would like to analyze the customs of one particular group of nomads, the Kazaks, that nowadays inhabit modern Kazakstan, parts of Mongolia, China, Russia, and other neighboring countries. Why them? Because their culture used to be a balanced blend between the always in motion pastoralist culture and agricultural sedentary tradition with its focus on Islam and Eastern mythology. This organic mix has created a unique, spiritually rich, and yet quite simplistic way of viewing the world. Although nowadays most of the Kazakhs live a relatively modern life, their ancestors' heritage could still be applied today. Moyınsunuw. Acceptance. Kazakhs often referred to life as жалған, дүние, the false or the illusory world. This interpretation has deep spiritual roots in Sufism and nomadic customs. Again, for one could die at any given moment, either during a long and dangerous trip home or on the battlefield. And thus, the real eternal life starts after one's death, in the afterlife. This gave birth to the concept of Moyınsunuw, the acceptance of one's fate. But it did not mean blind acceptance without an attempt to do something about the misfortune. One only accepted one's circumstances when there was literally nothing else to be done, when the battle could not be won. Whenever they were forced into such situations, Kazakhs would silently accept their fate with honor and refer to it simply as God's will. Here are some lines underlining this idea of acceptance and cyclicality of life from a poem by the 19th century Kazakh poet Майлы Қожа. Дүниеге мейман көңілім, мақтансаң дауа тілерсің. My soul is only a guest in this world. If I boast, you would pray I find healing. Өлшеніп берген өмір бар, уақытыңмен жүрерсің. Life is given out in measured portions, and you walk in step with time given to you. Кейбір күнді қапа боп, кейбір күнді күлерсің. Some days you will be burdened with sorrow, some days you will laugh with joy. Бір қалыппен еш пенде бітіре алмас үлесің. Көлің көлі бұлттай, көшпелі болған дүниесің. No human being can fulfill their share in one unchanging state. Like a dark and drifting cloud, this world itself is forever wandering. Modesty, minimalism, and meritocracy. Cattle played central role in Kazakhs' life as it guaranteed their survival. It also conveyed one's status. Anyone who was not scarce of it was considered wealthy. They could use their wealth to buy goods from merchants, grant basic education to their children, or gain even more status in the community. However, wealth barely forced them to alienate from the peers or become posh, so to say. Again, because of harsh climate and interdependence, wealth one earned in their lifetime could be lost in an instant. Besides, livestock did not usually belong to one man, but to the entire tribe or family. Another interesting point, since everything was interconnected, news in the steppe spread fast. So if someone had done any harm, ruining their individual reputation, other members of the clan discovered it sooner or later, as this in turn might have spoiled their collective reputation. Therefore, such system kept everyone at check. Any conflict needed to be resolved as soon as possible and as peacefully as possible. One had to act well, not bragging or showing off, otherwise they could get expulsed from the clan, a punishment scarier than death for any nomad. Minimalism was an obvious choice also because of the lifestyle itself. Nomads had to move constantly from one place to another, so they couldn't accumulate a lot of things. They relied solely on items that had actual practical or spiritual meaning, such as their cattle, horses, yurt, a housing structure that could be quickly disassembled and transported, swords, armor, religious items, food and clothes. Minimalism was not only applicable to common folks, but practiced by the elites as well. One of the notable examples is Qasım Khan, a 16th century leader of the Kazakh Khanate, often named as the most successful Khan in history, for his successful military campaigns and wise reign. Something that distinguished Qasım from the rulers of neighboring states was his commitment to the traditional nomadic lifestyle. While other Khans, upon conquering their sedentary neighbors, were building palaces, assimilating with locals, and becoming more sedentary, he continued migrating together with his people. One of the records describing Qasım's meeting with Mogolistan ruler mentions his devotion to a simple nomadic life. Such devotion was not always lucrative, since the only thing Khans obtained from the nomads was the army and livestock. Moreover, tribes were not always compliant, often showing discontent with their rulers' decisions. This in turn might have led to migrations or rebellions against him. Meanwhile, relocation to palaces offered more benefits, such as being served by slaves, staying away from battlefields, and having a more comfortable and stationary life. But in the long run, Qasım's choice proved to be more beneficial. It led to a democratic and flexible form of rule, rendering the leader more trustworthy and keen to reforms. This tactic has been implemented shortly by other Kazakh Khans. This way, Genghisites, that is, Genghis Khan's descendants, stayed in power longer than any other dynasty in Central Asia after the 15th century. It is also no coincidence that because of Qasım's devotion to the ideals of nomadism, the terms Kazakh or Kazakh Orda, Kazakh horde, were becoming more widespread in the region. As Kazakh means a free man, a wanderer, it also attracted nomads from other states who believed they had more in common with Kazakh Khanate's leader than with their own rulers. Honor and shame. Kazakhs valued dignity, honor, and shame more than material possessions, protecting their loved ones, respecting their peers, building resilience, performing good deeds, feeling shame if they did something wrong, not to scatter words, and not running away from responsibilities. All of this was crucial. Kazaks also believed that their ancestors are protecting and observing them from the internal world. Thus, they tried to act as good as they could, so that when they leave the illusory, they could proudly look at their parents' or grandparents' eyes and say, "Father, I've lived an honorable life." For warriors, it was very important to conduct battles honorably. The epics tell of cases when during a clash between Batars, a class of Kazakh warriors, an analogy of Japanese samurai, it became clear that one of them still had neither a family nor children. In such situations, the fight was immediately stopped. The Batar would then send his opponent back to the family, saying that the duel would resume in a year or two once he had an heir. Family and reciprocity. As mentioned previously, nomads could not survive alone. Breathing in unison as one living organism, they shared different responsibilities and helped each other. Traditions like amengerlek, widow marrying her late husband's brother or another close male relative, asar and julu, material and financial support for those in need, are used till present day. Kaznet, which is a Kazakh segment of the internet, is full of examples of people gathering big sums of money in a matter of days to rebuild one's house lost in a fire or paying for an expensive surgery abroad. Kazakhs did not express empathy only towards their own kind. They assisted anyone regardless of their religion or faith. And here's one story portraying it. Gertrude Plateis, a victim of Soviet repressions, a former prisoner of the Akhmola camp for wives of traitors to the motherland, formed, as the name implies, to silence the wives of political dissidents, upon her visit to Astana in 1990s, told the story of how Kazakhs once saved her life. It happened around the end of 1930s, during one of the darkest periods on Kazakh history, on the brink of the Second World War and shortly after Ashashlik, a man-made famine that took lives of roughly 1.5 million people. It happened on a stormy winter morning. Under the intensified watch of armed guards, the imprisoned women were gathering reeds along the shore of Lake Jalanash to build barracks. Each prisoner had her own quota, and fulfilling it meant working 17-20 hours a day. Exhausted, the women were literally collapsing from fatigue when suddenly elderly people and children, local residents from the neighboring Kazakh village of Zhanashu, appeared from the reeds. The elders gave a signal and the children began throwing stones at the women. The guards burst into loud, cruel laughter. "See, not only you are hated in Moscow, even here in the village, children despise you." It was incredibly painful and humiliating, above all, morally, recalls Gertruda Plateis. The beatings continued for several days. Tears streamed down the faces of the poor prisoners. Quietly, they cried out against their fate and condemned what they believed was the injustice of Kazakhs, poisoned and embittered by Stalinist propaganda. But one day, weakened by the stones flying at her, Gertruda stumbled and fell face first onto them. A second later, she noticed the smell of curds. The stones she had tried so desperately to shield herself from smelled of cheese and milk. She picked one up from the ground and put it in her mouth. It was delicious. She gathered the little stones and carried them back to the barracks, where the prisoners stayed, among them Kazakh women. They explained that it was kurt, salted, sun-dried balls of curd cheese. It turned out that in order to help the imprisoned women in any way they could, the local Kazakhs had found the only method that would not attract the guards' attention, disguising their compassion behind a mask of apparent cruelty and contempt toward the prisoners. The Kazakhs themselves had survived the famine of the 1930s, yet even the fear of losing their own children did not stop them. Secretly, they hid pieces of boiled meat, flat bread, kort, and toasted grain meal in the bushes. The survivors carried gratitude for the rest of their lives. The fifth and final wisdom is Tolık Adam, the complete man. This concept was first proposed by the most famous 19th century Kazakh thinker, poet, and as many would say, a philosopher, Abay. It entails that to be Adam, to be human, it was not enough to be born one, but to strive to become one. The complete human should have akıl, khayrat, and jurek, that is, the intelligence, the character, and the heart. So one should strive to be smart, resilient, full of energy, strive for greatness, and act with goodwill. Here is an excerpt from Abay's poem. Ақыл қайрат жүректі бірдей ұста, сонда толық боласың елден бөлек. Keep intellect, willpower, and heart in equal balance. Then you will become a complete man, distinct among others. Жеке-жеке біреуі жарытпайды, жолда жоқ жарым есті жақсы демек. Alone, none of them is sufficient, and there is no way to call the half-formed good. Every Kazakh strived to be versatile. They were great horsemen, pastors, wrestlers, warriors, and at the same time, very artistic people. One of such examples was Махамбет Өтемісұлы, who was a batır, a warrior, Akın, a poet, and Kisha, a musician. He fought in numerous battles, wrote several compositions, among which there is a famous küy called Jumur Kılıç. Küy is an instrumental composition performed on dombra, Kazakh two-string long-necked lute. The story behind the creation of Jumur Kılıç is interesting. Mahambet had a friend named Isatay, who was also a famous warrior. The composition was written shortly after Isatay's death in 1838. Mahambet was devastated by his loss. Left alone, he had not much friends to rely on. Eventually, he was able to recover and went to the Baybakhta clan, living along the Jayık river to take revenge on his rivals. There he met two batırs, Jumur, whose actual name was Sadr, and Kılıç, which then became his friends. Once, one of Mahambet's rivals attempted to capture him, but Jumur and Kılıç managed to save him and help to escape. That is how, as a sign of gratitude to the new friends, this composition was born. I will leave a link in the description if you'd like to listen to it. It is one of my favorite performances of this composition. There is even a rock version which I also leave a description to. Mahambet had also authored numerous poems, among which is Yereuli atqa yer salmay. It praises courage, heroism, perseverance, and devotion of batırs to protect one's homeland. Its main idea is that freedom cannot be attained without endurance and struggle. Only those who work hard and face difficulties with bravery could reach their goals. And here's the poem. Ереулі атқа ер салмай, егеулі найза қолға алмай, еңку жер шолмай, қоңыр салқын төскі алмай. Without saddling the war horse, without taking the whetted spear in hand, without roaming the rolling earth, without lying on the cool brown hills. Тебінгі терге шірімей, терлігі майдан ерімей, алты-малта ас болмай, өзіңнен туған жас бала, сақалы шығып жат болмай. Without the saddlecloth rotting in sweat, without the warrior's blanket wearing thin in battle, without even hard-dried curds for food, without your own young son growing a beard and turning a stranger. At üstünde күн көрмөй, ашаршылык шөл көрмөй, өзөгө талып ет жемей, ер төсөктөн безинбей, улуу түскө урунбай. Without living your days on horseback, without knowing hunger and thirst, without your insides aching from lack of meat, without turning away from a hero's bed, without falling into dark noon-like doom. Түн катып жүрүп, түс кашпай, тебинги терис тагынбай, темир казык жастанбай, куу толагай бастанбай, ерлердин иси битерми. Without riding through sleepless nights, without fastening the stirrup straps wrong side out, without resting your head on an iron stake until men's heads are stripped to bare skulls, can the deeds of warriors ever be fulfilled? With all of this being said, Kazakh worldview might serve as an alternative to modern individualism and nihilism. However, it is no magic pill either. The solution is, as always, to combine the wisdoms of antiquity with the achievements of modernity. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next episode.